Thank you so much, Nazar, for the wonderful introduction. All right. Yeah. So, like Nazar said, let's talk about cultivating transformations. And I say cultivating because we are creating conditions. We're not directing and forcing. So, cultivating transformations by connecting the soulful and the practical. We do need to get practical outcomes, but we need to do them in a soulful way. So, let's talk about how we do that. Okay. Let's see. So, my hypothesis here for you today is when agilists attend to the soul of an organization, we can make the world a better place. So I really truly believe that if we're doing all the wonderful things we're doing and making sure to attend to that soul, that's where the value is. And we're in a unique position. Everyone on this call in this conference is in a unique position to do that. So Nazar already introduced me, but some things you might not know is mother of three, 13, 15, and 17. But I'm super passionate about workplaces that are soulful, productive, and fun. And I really do mean tangible financial outcomes and soulfulness, where we can actually have a place where we enjoy going to work and we enjoy our jobs. So for the next 30, 40 minutes or so, what are we going to do? We're going to talk about, well, what is soul in the first place? What is this person what is this woman talking about? What then is transformational leadership? And why is it so important for a transformational leader to attend to soul? Why is that part of our job? And then we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts. What are the three tenets of soul at work? And then how can we actually go do that? How can a transformational leader enable soulfulness? Okay. So what is soul? And I use that word and I chose it carefully, but sometimes we all have different meanings, ideas of what that might mean. So let's talk about what I mean by this. So sometimes it's easier to start by looking at what happens when there's no soul instead of looking at when there is soul. So just think for a minute, and you can go ahead and put it in the chat window if you want to share, but think of a time when your soul was crushed at work. And you can go ahead and put it in the chat, excuse me, or go just think about it yourself. But my experience from doing this is we've all had them. Most of us have had multiple. Okay. So I'll just leave that. You can continue to put that in the chat as we go on, but just thinking about when was your soul crushed? And that's no fun. So then when we talk about the flip of that, so what is soul? You can go ahead again and feel free to enter in the chat what you think soul is. And I'm going to keep moving on about how we can define this thing. So soul is the essence, the ethos, the spirit, that's that intangible quality of a person or organization. So we say it's a soul of a person that sometimes is crushed at work, but sometimes the whole organization is lacking soul. And you know that when you go into an organization that's soulless. Even if I don't give it a definition, you walk into a soulless organization and you know immediately because the place feels dead. It's really the life force and the power source that brings everything into existence. So it's that power source that does create the actual actions. So when I talk about soul and practical outcomes connecting together, because for way too long, folks, we've had these things be separate. Like we have some fun stuff over here and some soulful stuff over here, but then it doesn't really connect to these practical outcomes that we're creating. So in your soul crushing moment, think about what the impact was on the practical outcome. Did that impact the work that was getting done? Did it impact your ability to be effective, productive, collaborative, all of those things, innovative, creative, right? There's an actual practical impact when we have soul crushing workplaces. And your practical outcomes and goals rely on that life force of soul. And we need to appreciate the fact that soul is what's driving those outcomes. Okay, so how do we connect that then to our role as transformational leaders? Organizations are living systems and not machines. So that's the first thing to think about. Far too long, we've treated our organizations and teams as machines. And we even say that, we say we have our factory, right? Like it's our software factory. But what happens is it doesn't work because they're humans and not machines. And then they keep breaking. We're like, why does this machine keep breaking? Because it's not a machine. So if we assume that our organizations are living systems are fueled by soul. That is the fuel of a living system. Now, if you stick with me here, transformational leader's job is to breathe life into an organization. So the conclusion here is, therefore, transformational leaders must attend to soul, because transformational leaders are creating that fuel that is fueling that living system, that human system. Let me just take a look and see what you guys put in the chat here. Yeah. I see some things in the chat of souls crushed, huge layoffs, having your soul crushed, authenticity. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so here we have it. Our role as transformational leaders, and you're all transformational leaders, is that we really do have to attend to the soul of an organization. So now that I've said that, what's a transformational leader, and how do I know that you're all transformational leaders? Because a transformational leader is anybody who takes responsibility for changing their world. And if you're on this call, I'm going to assume that you have taken responsibility for in some way changing your world. A transformational leader, I also say, is part spiritual leader, part work manager, part inspirer, and part community builder. And if you're doing this job, you know that, right? It's not just teaching people how to do agile. It's not just teaching people how to prioritize. It is really pulling people together, inspiring them, helping them through some of their emotional blockers, right? You're a therapist, you're doing all these things. And I want to just appreciate for a minute what a tough job that is for us. That is a hard job. And it's a hard job because they're saying, we want you to push the status quo and show us new ways of working, but you're still being judged in the old way. And if it's too new, then you get in trouble. And you're sort of, you never know where the landmines are. You're pushing the envelope all the time. And sometimes the resistance that you get is from your boss or from your same direct line of command. And you're working in a hierarchy, even though you don't feel like you should, but you are. So it is really a hard job that can challenge you every single day. So our first order of business as transformational leaders is to attend to our own soul first, because you can't give what you don't have. So just making sure that we're always doing that internal work of, becoming resilient, creating self-awareness, staying grounded, doing the self-care that we need to care for ourselves so that we can actually care for the organization. Okay, it challenges, I talk about it on here, your self-worth, your ego, your values are under fire every day, right? So it's a hard job. But we do it because we're called to it, right? We don't necessarily do it by choice. We're called to this work. So when we look at having soul at work, it really does rely on three things being present. And I'm just going to go through these quickly and we'll build on it in a minute. It does depend on power, freedom, and connection. So let's take a look at what those are. So there is an organization, you can see at the bottom here, soulsatwork.org, nonprofit, about what we need to do to bring soul to work. But the three things are power, which is energy, being able to have the energy to make things happen, not having people have power over you. 2, freedom, which is decisions and actions that are not based in fear or threat. And then connection, which is developing deep, caring relationships with others, even at work, right? We spend a lot of our time at work. We want to have connection. So I'm going to scratch the surface slightly on those three. So power, just one example of power. How does it feel when someone has power over you and they can flick you like a bug, like in this picture? For most of us, it doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good to me when I was a kid in school and, teachers had power over you. It doesn't feel good to me at work. Just in general, we don't love that feeling. The second one was freedom. And this is just one example of freedom. Finances. Do we have freedom from our finances, or are we making decisions based on these golden handcuffs that are keeping us from making good decisions for ourselves and for the company? Those golden handcuffs don't do anybody any good. And then the last one is connection. As humans, we're pretty good at this. COVID has really shown a light on our need for connection. We're wired for connection. So we're going to get connection whether the company gives it to us or not. But it really is better when we intentionally can create it and the company can put ways in place for people to connect. So those are the three things that give us soul at work: power, freedom, and connection. So put those in the back of your head for a minute. We're going to come back to them later. I just want to make a comment here on energy leakage. So this is like, I don't have any bars. When we don't attend to soul, energy leaks out of the organization. So we talked about that a minute ago. when, your soul is crushed, your energy is leaking out to go talk to your friend at work, to go into the bathroom, take a minute, to go for a walk. Like we're just not as, excuse me, we're not as high performing, we're not as productive when we don't attend to the soul. And then when somebody had said in the chat, layoffs, think about when there's layoffs, what happens at work? Everybody's talking about in the hallways the whole time. So we leak out that energy because we haven't attended to the soul. And that's individuals and organizations. This happens to you individually as well. So that's why it becomes really practical to direct the energy in a positive way. So let's take a minute to just make it really practical and look at 5 steps that we can take to inject soul where we find in pockets where soul is missing. Okay. So 5 steps to soul at work. I don't learn how to click. Okay. So the first one is we take a look at what is the soulful purpose. So if you think about something soulless at work, why are we doing this in the first place? There was a reason, and presumably it's not to torture everybody. So what was that reason? So just refocusing on why are we doing this in the first place? And I'll run you through an example of this in just a minute. So number 2, what makes it soul crushing? What's so soul crushing about this process? Performance reviews, budget planning, staff meetings, right? What's making it soul crushing? And then where does it violate those 3 things we just talked about? The power, the freedom, and the connection. Where is that process violating those things that are so key to giving us soul? And then we take a look at what tensions are at play. So put that in the back of your mind for a minute. I'm going to talk about tensions in just a minute. There's usually these polarities and tensions that are somehow at play. And if we can identify those, we can really get access to the soul. And then number 5, then now that we've kind of unpacked some of the negative here, then we can take it into a positive space of possibility and talk about, well, what would it take? What would it take to bring soul into this process? So these 5 steps can be used by yourself. Like you can just kind of walk through them alone at your desk in your home office, or you can actually do it with a team and say, like, as a team, how can we revamp this soulless process, excuse me, to bring some soul? And we can walk through these 5 steps together. So I talked about what tensions are at play. That was number 4. So let me talk a little bit quickly about what I mean by that. So tensions, also known as polarities in some circles, are these values that appear to be opposing, but can be synergistic. So we treat them as if they're mutually exclusive, but they actually can work together and be generative. When you manage them badly, they result in oscillation. So we'll look at some of the examples in a minute, but if you say very common in Agile is this concept of stability and change. So, you'll see that companies will move from like very stable to now we need a lot of change. Oh no, too much change. Let's move back to stability. So they lurch back and forth without really moving forward. But when we can manage them well, they can really result in creative productivity, or what we call generative. We call generative tension. So I'm going to share with you 10 of the most common tensions that are present in organizations. There's hundreds, but let me share with you some of the common ones that you can look for as you're looking for places for soul. Excuse me for coughing. I did have COVID a couple of weeks ago, so I'm trying to suppress the cough. I'm all better now. Okay, so internal and external, right? Like, are we focusing internally? Are we focusing externally on the customer? And some companies swing back and forth like, oh no, we're focusing too internally. We have to go to the customer. But really, the bottom line is it needs to be both. Performance and health. So where are we? So I look at this as Brian too would say, this is the GPS and your dashboard of your car. Your dashboard says that the car is healthy. Your GPS shows you where you're going. Leadership and followership, stability and change, we just talked about a little bit. Structure and flow, which is we want to have enough structure to create flow, not so much structure that we're blocking flow. Long-term and short-term, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Like we need to have both of those in our vision. Exploitation and innovation. And here I mean exploitation in the nicest way possible. Like we definitely need to be able to, thank you for saying I'm feeling better. Yes. Exploitation, we definitely need to be able to get value out of the products and services that we already have. And we also need to come up with new products and services and innovate, but we can't ignore what we already have in place. Parts and whole. You know what that means? Centralize and decentralize. Another big thing with Agile, right? We always want to decentralize everything, but some things need to be centralized. And then you end up with these centers of excellence, which is a move back to centralizing some of the functions because some things need to be centralized and some things need to be decentralized. Spawn and shed. This is a huge one in organizations that we hate. Nobody really likes to shed anything. So we hang on to things for far too long after they need to be released because it's like we've invested all this money in them. But we definitely need to learn how to spawn new things when there's a new opportunity and shed things really earlier probably than we do now. So this is just a quick overview of some tensions that we play with in organizations and a place to look for where when these are managed badly and we're oscillating, really souls can be crushed. When we're swinging back and forth between stability and change, souls can be crushed. But if we can manage those well and make them generative, souls can flourish. Okay, so going back to the 5 steps here, applying the 5 steps. So I thought, well, what's the most soulless practice in organizations? Well, budget planning, of course, is definitely one of them. It's definitely in the top 3. So I'll just run you through the process, run you through the 5 steps, applying it to a process. So what's the soulful purpose of budget planning? Well, presumably to invest smartly through the organization so that it can thrive and we can all keep our jobs and we can all love our jobs. Something like that. What makes budget planning soul crushing? Well, because we might lose budget, we won't have the resources to do the things that we feel like we need to do. We may lose people, right? All of these, and it takes forever, right? A lot of these things make it soul crushing. We don't feel like we have control over it. Where does budget planning violate power, freedom, and connection? So it violates power in a lot of organizations because it's controlled by superiors, right? They get to tell you if you have budget or not. You don't get to earn budget. Violates freedom in some organizations, I've heard, because we can't pivot. We can't pivot within our budget. We've promised this, even though we know we need to do something else. That's not what's in the budget. Or we've made all kinds of money, but we can't incorporate that we can't leverage that in our budget. So there's not really that freedom to move based on our success or even our own failures. And then connection. Boy, some of these budgeting processes are like every man or woman for themselves. And it's like a zero-sum game. Like either I'm going to get the budget or you are, and I'm going to win. So it sort of blocks connection from people sharing money across. What tensions are at play when we plan the budget? In a lot of organizations, it's the long and the short term, right? It's like, should we choose a long-term or a short-term strategy here to invest in? Spawn and shed, we hate letting go of things. We keep funding them, even though we should probably cut the budget, and we don't fund new things that we should be spawning. And then part and whole comes up a lot in the budget planning process as well. And then number 5, so what would it take to bring soul into budget planning? So that's the one where we get creative. I've seen organizations do some things. I do have a blog, which I can share with you, where one organization sort of teased apart the capacity, the prioritization, capacity planning, and then actually the funding, because those were all kind of mixed together. So by pulling those apart, the soul came back in. It just mixing those together was crushing souls. That's just one example, but that's where you get creative. Okay, so excuse me. So that is sort of the spiel on soulful and practical in terms of leadership transformation. I'll talk to you towards the end, and you can check out my book, which is lots more tools and techniques about connecting that soulful and practical together. And we do this as Agile people anyway. Right? Agile is all about connecting the soulful and the practical. That's what a daily stand-up is. That's what a retrospective is, right? That's what a demo is, really soulful. So, you're already doing this, but can we do it even more?